Tupac Assassination, the podcast, rips the curtain away from the 30-year-old investigation of the murder of legendary rap artist Tupac Shakur through the eyes of director of the Tupac Assassination movies and the recent docuseries on Tubi, Tupac Cover-Up, Richard R.J. Bond. Each week, he and co-host Jeffrey Wilson, along with other co-hosts, will explore some facet of how these incredible and beloved documentaries were made, the pain, the healing, and most importantly, the people who were unafraid of telling their truth about what they knew to make that truth public. Welcome to our podcast.
Hey everybody, it's RJ Bond, the producer and director of the Tupac Assassination series, along with Last Man Standing, the Nick Broomfield movie, and the new 6-part docuseries on Tubi called Tupac Cover-Up. Check it out when you can. As with me always, Jeff Wilson, say hello.
What's up? What's up? How's everybody doing?
So we are doing well, although yesterday I can honestly say very bittersweet day. For
Well,
sure.
and I'm obviously, anybody who's paying attention to this case has seen that Keefe was found guilty for a jailhouse ordeal that went down not too long ago. I'm very anxious to hear your insights about this because you were there, and
Yeah.
it belies a larger question that we've had since this happened. I'm wondering, is Keefe if this trial has been pushed back? Will he make it to trial? Is he safe in jail? And correct me if I'm wrong, the timing of this altercation happened. It could mean absolutely nothing, but the timing of this altercation happened not long after he alleged other involvement of individuals allegedly that we've spoken of, particularly Reginald Wrong. But yeah, a lot to talk about today.
Holy macro, the tinfoil hat came out fast today. All right. So let's back up a quick step. For everybody who doesn't already know, and we always want to make sure people are caught up on things. There's a fellow by the name of Dwayne Keith Davis, and he goes by Keefe D as his moniker. It's been a street name for years. And he is currently arrested in jail pending a trial coming up in February of next year. He's been accused of first-degree murder with a gang enhancement for the murder of Tupac Shakur. And that is I guess he's been in jail now for about a year, so it's been kind of a long ordeal. They served the search warrants on him, and I think it was September of 23 when they first. No, it's when they arrested him. They served the search warrant like May of 23. So it's again, this has been a long, ongoing debacle. And I happened to be there through about 2 days. It was a 2-day trial. I happened to be there through trial, through jury selection, through the entire event to watch how it came down. And not only was I part of that, Jeff, but I actually had media credentials, so I was able to actually videotape the entire trial. And that was a cool thing. You couldn't videotape jury selection, which was very interesting all by itself, but you could, obviously videotape the trial, and we did exactly that. So we've already posted the verdict that was read, and the footage of the verdict was read. It's on the Tupac Assassination channel, but YouTube channel, I should say. But we've definitely posted that, and we've got a lot more because I'm going to eventually post the entire trial. And that way, again, this is open transparency. Let people see, was
Yes.
PPD, was he railroaded? It's a very, very interesting case. And I can, right now, because of certain legal considerations, I have to be kind of cautious about speculating on things or talking about things and that. For example, we learned that Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's lead investigator on the Tupac case, starting in 2018 and going until 2023 when he retired after he gave a grand jury statement to the grand jury. He went ahead and retired. His name was Clifford Mogg. And what many people know about Cliff Mogg is that he was the one for his grand jury testimony, which you normally expect a cop to be like, hey, this is what I did. I investigated this and I looked over here and he was doing this and she was doing that. And what you got him sitting down with Keefe D's book and literally reading the book to the grand jury. That's what he did. So not a not a good optic there. Um, but he was the quote unquote lead investigator in the case, and we learned yesterday, which was a surprise to me. It should have been, I guess, but it was. Um, that he retired. Cliff Mogg retired from the Vegas Police Department and was immediately hired by the Clark County Prosecutor's Office as a paid consultant to help them review phone calls, review emails, to go through and vet these things and videos. So he is now monitoring every call that goes into Keefe D's in the jail. Every video chat that you have with him is being reviewed by Cliff Mogg. He says he sits down and does them once a week and he goes through them. But we're talking on the order, I think for this case, there were 84 phone calls. But that is what he has been appointed to do. You with
If
me?
you were to speculate, why would you think they would need somebody like that to run such a tight scrutiny on Keefe and his communications?
Well, I think two things. I think they're looking for Keefe to admit something in the Tupac trial that they can use against him. That's the first thing. And Mogg, claims that he knows all the nicknames and knows all the people, and he can basically give you a roadmap of that. But the other part of it, the other reason that I think Quick Mogg was involved, in addition to just looking for more dirt on there, they revealed this hand yesterday. Um, and as I told Keefe Jr., that if you want to call them the enemy, they have revealed their true face. They
Hmm.
went through these phone calls and tried to use, and they made inferences. And this is a phone call between Keefe and we think it's his girlfriend. Well, it's not. It was his wife, but they're trying to sully that up and sully his reputation up by making that claim. But they played about a dozen phone calls that Keefe had in jail to various individuals, and Mogg was the one who was listening to all of them. It's expected that Keefe D's made over 1,000 phone calls. I think that was Mogg's testimony in and out of the jail in the last 2 years. And so they're going through there, and so that's why you have to be very careful about what you say because they are truly monitoring what's going on. So
Hmm.
but that's not going to stop me from talking about what I saw.
Sure,
And,
sure.
and the reason that I bring it up is because it's a very interesting exercise on a couple of different levels. Let's start by talking about Las Vegas and Nevada law, because I think this is a very interesting thing that people could really dig into. Nevada and Las Vegas and the history of Nevada has a very different trajectory than a lot of towns. By the time Las Vegas came about, it was actually it's a very young town compared to many towns like Chicago or Philadelphia or
Yeah.
even parts of Los Angeles. Vegas was created kind of in the 40s and took off, and so we're talking about maybe 60 years that the city's actually been around. So when you look at the history of Las Vegas, uh, everybody knows the mob was, huge in Vegas and started Vegas, the whole
Ben
nine.
Siegel and the Flamingo.
Yeah, absolutely. And that this, money drove the business here. So for many, many years, there was a battle between the cowboys and the mob guys. I think you watch a good movie on that's Casino with De Niro, that they talk about that battle between the cowboys who were the ranchers and the guys that owned a lot of the scrub brush but made a living doing cattle and other things, and were the locals, as you call them,
Hmm.
versus the mob guys that came in. And the cowboys didn't like the mob guys didn't like the cowboys, but the cowboys were pretty well fixtures in government because they had been there longer than the mob guys that moved in. So the elections were very much, I won't say like inbred, but they kind of were, where, it was very nepotistic, so and so's son was a senator, so he's the next
Yeah.
senator. And that's how I did it. But getting back to the way Nevada law works, is in how it was formed. The law grows out of the development of the city and the social issues that the city has. So if you look at New York and you look at Chicago or Philadelphia, these cities that are 200 plus years old, a lot of people came over. A lot of organized crime was formed in New York with the mob, Jersey, Philadelphia, Chicago, pick it, big city. And the secret of these mob guys was that they knew how to skirt the laws because when you break it down, Jeff, I mean, most laws are pretty much the same. Okay, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't lie, kind of Ten Commandments kind of thing.
Hmm.
And they're all pretty generic, and they have been in many cities for a long time. They have different little flavors here and there, but they pretty much have, you shouldn't do this, and there's a misdemeanor, and there's a felony, and they kind of have that well defined. And that's basically come from one city when somebody else moves and sets a government in another city, and they copy those laws, and they copy those laws. So a lot of your cities like Chicago and New York, if you were to look at their laws, they're very much similar. Same thing with Philadelphia, a lot of the older cities. As we moved west, of course, cities got built, cities got developed, Los Angeles got built, and they all kind of had that same legal code base that says you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. The mob guys, ever since New York was founded, and then the migration to the other cities and all that, the organized crime guys knew what the laws were, and they knew how to skirt around the laws. They knew how, if it said you can't, if you're going to go to jail if you deposit $10,000, you're going to be charged for money laundering. They would deposit 9,000.
Right.
So when as these laws were developed and they kept moving through it and laws, the mob guys knew how to avoid the law. So that's how they got away with doing what they did for so long, prohibition and all that. So fast forward to Nevada, and the mob comes into Nevada, and they've got free reign of everything around here. And the cowboys are kind of perplexed because they know that what the mob guys are getting away with, and they know it's because the laws that they have mirror many of the other laws in the United States cities in the U.S. So they come up with this batshit crazy plan to modify their laws and make their laws in Nevada, especially in Clark County and Las Vegas, because that was the big draw in Nevada. Not a lot going on in Reno at that time. That they were going to modify their laws as such that when it was legal to make a left-hand turn and the mob made a left-hand turn, they suddenly made it illegal to make that left-hand turn so that the mob had nowhere to go. They were like, well, you're not supposed to do that. Well, we just did. We just changed the law. We altered the law to catch you doing something that you would have gotten away with in any other state, but we changed our laws so that you can't specifically so you can't get away with it. Follow?
Yeah.
So when you look at how Vegas was constructed and they did this, that means that you're going to be doing some kind of crazy lawmaking. You're gonna have what I would consider to be non-conventional laws. Okay. For example, there's a law in Nevada that I don't believe exists in California that if two people conspire together to do a thing, and by the way, that thing doesn't actually have to be done. Just the fact that they got together and conspired to do a thing, regardless
Yeah.
of whether or not it was done, they're guilty of a crime. So, for example, you and I, Jeff, we decide we're going to go rob the In-N-Out Burger here in Vegas. Okay. And we get in our car and we talk about it and we go, yeah, well, that'd be great. Let's go. We'll get some money and some food at the same time. Double trouble, right? So you and I agree that we're going to go do this. And we actually never do. We go, oh, that was a stupid idea. And we turn around and drive away. If somebody heard us say that and they filed a report that we said that and they heard us talking about robbing the In-N-Out Burger, that's a felony, depending on what the underlying crime that we were talking about doing.
Right.
Okay. It's a felony. Just for, and again, you don't have to do the crime if you just talk about it. And why? Okay, so you see how crazy that is?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Conspiracy to
crazy.
commit whatever crime.
Yeah, but it's not, but the conspiracy in most states involves you have to do an act of furtherance. That's what it's
Right.
called.
Right. Yeah.
So, for example, in California, there's like prostitution laws, and they follow most of the laws in the other states. that when you get a solicitation, you can get solicited or you can solicit somebody, but then there has to be a second qualifying act, which means an act of furtherance. So it's not just talk.
Right.
You got to
Yeah.
go do something. You got to hook up with a girl or you got to do whatever you do. But or go to a hotel room, or sometimes even just turning as the girl walks around the corner, you turn in the same direction as the girl, and you've committed
Mm.
what they call an act of furtherance. Well, in Nevada, they've removed that act of furtherance from the law. And you say to yourself, well, that's batshit crazy. And no, because mob guys plan to do a lot of things. And if they can decrease the mob presence by having a snitch inside the mob that can
Mm.
rat out the guys that are talking about doing a crime, well, then that's a felony and they can convict those guys and throw the mob guys in jail.
Jeez.
You understand that example? And one simple example, I think I hope so. I tried to break down why being in Nevada and being in Las Vegas or Clark County is unusual. Nevada has unusual laws, okay, like the one I just mentioned. True,
Hmm.
true law. So when you get to looking at Dwayne Davis, Keefe D, the alleged killer of Tupac, you look at what the laws are that he's being charged under. And ironically, it's funny because they, for all this talk of conspiracy, they never charged him with that crime, by the way, that conspiracy crime. You thought that would have been a layup instead a murder charge, which is a very high bar. They could have charged him with something silly like that conspiracy law that he and Orlando Anderson got together and planned a thing, and that's it. And they charge him on that. It's kind of a lower bar.
Right.
But instead, they charged him with that. Now, so as it
This is where they can
applies
get him
to,
on the book and the Vlad and the talking about it.
well, yeah, I mean, well, that's in the murder case, but let's talk about the case that happened yesterday.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's apply this. I just talked about how wacky Nevada laws could be, but and that's unfortunately where Keith Edie decided to move to. When you when Keith Edie was charged with two counts yesterday, it was battery of a prisoner, fellow prisoner, and then and that's a gross felony, or that's a felony, and then the other one was fighting. That's literally what the charge is, fighting, and that's a gross misdemeanor. Okay, so the maximum sentence for the battery on a prisoner is 6 years. I think they said the maximum for the gross misdemeanor is 12 months. That's the maximum sentence. And at one point, and we'll put all the video up because I was finally able to, because I had a video camera and was able to film the actual footage itself, the real unredacted footage, not the one you see on the news, but the other one, the unredacted footage. You can see that at one point, Keefe D was coming back from an appointment with his attorney. And when he came back from that appointment with his attorney, he walked into a secured area, which is it's basically a hub where all the jail cells connect to. And Keefe D is on restricted protective supervision, which means that no inmates act with each other without corrections officers being present. They're in their holding cell for 23 hours a day. They get out for 1 hour to shower and uh, walk around or just get out of their cell for a minute or make a phone call. They're allowed that time. And in the course of him coming into this area, there was another man who was standing at the sink without any guard present, and he was just standing there, and he had his shirt off. And as the officer that leads Keefe D through, they buzz him through the door, and he goes into this central area where this guy is standing. According to one of the corrections officers, this guy was hiding behind a pole because from the door Keefe D came in, you couldn't see past that pole. There's a big giant pole in the middle of this area. And Keefe D is walking by. The correction officer that's with him is looking down. He's reading a card. It looks like he was on his phone, but he was just looking at a card or something. Wasn't paying any attention at all. And Keefe D gets basically, in my opinion, looking at the video, he gets attacked by this other guy. They say, "What's up?" And he says, "What's up?" And then suddenly the dude lunges. Now, the dude that attacked KVD is also on trial for murder. He murdered his girlfriend because he thought that she said something to him that he didn't like.
Jesus.
Yeah, and he's very mental
Do we
unstable.
know if these two had any previous interaction?
No, and that was brought up at the trial.
Okay.
There was not a single ounce of evidence that in all the phone calls that Cliff Mogg went through, and that was one of the things that Carl Arnold, the attorney for QVD, actually brought up, and it was a good point. That in all these phone calls, this dude's name has never been mentioned one time. There's never been a problem stated. Um, they tried to say early in the trial with the first investigator that they called for the state, the investigator said that there had been talk that they were communicating with each other from each one of their holding cells. The dude that attacked TVD was 2 cells over from him, and the cells aren't airtight or sound tight. They have, obviously cracks under the doors and ways you
Right.
can. The doors are wood, so you can talk. And there was talk by the investigator that these guys were having words back and forth. This guy and KVD were having words back and forth, and they were yelling at each other back and forth in the holding cells. Unfortunately, when they asked what they were saying, the guy had no idea. No one ever actually said that there was a specific thing that anybody said, and there was no evidence that he had said anything to this guy at all. None. So, the state moved forward with this thought that they had this pre-existing animosity towards each other. And unfortunately, there isn't a single ounce of evidence that supports that. Nothing supports that they had any kind of past at all. You have you answer
No,
ask
I
question
just it just
ask question.
I'm waiting for more. It just seems
Okay,
so.
so
I mean,
all
obviously the
right,
guy
so
wasn't right
he
in his
gets
head, so this was just a
so
random attack.
so this guy runs at Keefe gets a couple steps in, and Keefe because he was facing him with his hands down, and the state tried to make a big deal about how his fists were clenched and all that, but ultimately the guard wasn't paying any attention. You have a murderer, an alleged murderer, standing in the room unsupervised, no correction officer anywhere around, and
All
he's
right, now how much
standing
does that
there.
violate standard operating procedure?
Well, and there was a lot of talk about that, but what it reminded me is it reminded me of watching Sons of Anarchy when they wanted somebody to be killed in prison, and suddenly the guards were like, "Oh, look, it's my break time. I guess I got to go." And they split, and then the guy gets shivved to death in the shower. Guards don't know anything. Oh, I don't know anything. So it just immediately reminded me of that. Um,
So I know you
Turned
don't like
out
to speculate tinfoil hat wide, but I mean, with that seemingly being a violation of somewhat kind of standard operating procedure, do you think this was allowed to take place?
Well, that was actually very controversial. There was time spent on this by both sides where the lead investigator guy who turned out to be just a turd, he didn't investigate anything, and he was sweating to death when he was under cross-examination. He was sweating bullets and he left. He's the only investigator I know that didn't investigate anything. And Carl Arnold, KPD's attorney, he's like, well, you're the investigator, aren't you supposed to be investigating these things? Like, who said what? Oh, yeah, well, yeah, I guess I wasn't there that day when they trained investigators how to investigate. So, yeah, it was like that. But anyway, what he said was that actually, and I'll kind of lay it out. Basically, to avoid interactions or problems, each one of these hubs and you'll see it in the video, each one of these hubs where it's a hub and spoke, where each one of the spoke is a quadrant of 24 jail cells. And they have like 4 or 5 of them, and they all branch out from this central area that KVD was walking through in that what they call a pod in that holding area. There is a corrections officer. There's a guy. He is supposed to be the pod officer there, the guy that makes that just his job is to do nothing but just make sure everything's running smoothly in the common area. And this was kind of comical on the videotape. This guy that's watching the pod while this prisoner is standing over in the by the sink is where he was with his shirt off. He's standing there. This corrections officer literally just walks away. He just walks down the hall and through a closed door.
Right.
Just literally walks away, like, oh. And so they said, well, what was that all about? And this investigator was adamant that every 30 minutes they had to do a cell check where they checked that all the cells were secured and all the prisoners were accounted for. And, of course, what is this, Alcatraz? But that every 30 minutes that they had to go into these private lockdown jail cells, this pod of 24, and every 30 minutes this guard has to make a check. And he goes, "That's absolute. That's policy. That's our rules. We have to do that. That's there's no you can't make any exception for that rule. Has to happen." And so Carl Arnold, the attorney, he said, "Well, what? And I don't understand. If you have a prisoner that's standing there and you literally walk away from him and leave him unsupervised, yeah, we do it all the time. Wow. Okay. Next." So this guy's standing there. The corrections officer just walks away. Like I said, Sons of Anarchy. He decided he was going to go through a locked door and go check out the rest of the cells for whatever that was worth, and he's leaving a prisoner sitting there.
Two of
So,
them. You're leaving two people on trial for murder unsupervised.
well, no, because the one that was walking Keefe D had a correction officer with him.
Okay, okay,
Keefe
okay.
D was just coming back from his attorneys. I don't want to get anybody confused with the geography.
Okay.
PPD was coming back through that common area to his cell. And like I said, it's one of the hub and spokes, one of the lines of cells that come off that common area. So he had to pass through that common area. And KVD walked with the corrections officer that was assigned to him to escort him to his cell. The entire time this altercation happened until they actually started fighting, this correction officer had his head buried, like you see people reading their phones, their iPhones. He had his head buried in some card that was supposed to tell him where Kefidi was staying because this guy he was on overtime and they just kind of assigned him there and he didn't really do this for a living. That wasn't his main goal, main job. And this guy's head's down, he's got his head in the card, and he doesn't even see the guy who attacks KVD. He keeps walking. KVD stops because as they clear that post I was talking about, the dude says, "What's up?" And so suddenly now KVD, because it's saying from the side, he turns squarely with his hands down to stand in front of the guy head on, and he says, "What's up?" Okay, what's up? What's up? That was the big challenge. Okay, and they tried to go on. The Vegas PD tried to go on and on about the significance of what's up means in a prison. And of course, I'd love anybody's feedback. RJ Bond, what I know, Outlook.com. Hit the show. Tell me if there's any truth to that at all. That what's up is actually a challenge to fight. Okay, we'll find out. So he says, "What's up?" Now, QVD is actually now facing him with his hands down. The jailer walks past, or the corrections officer walks past Keefe towards the jail cell area where he's going to go, that spoke, if you will. And when he goes to that, um, as he's walking, suddenly this dude out of nowhere just lights up and attacks Keefe. About a step and a half in, because Keefe was already facing him, he saw him coming. And it was like watching a National Geographic show where the two rams butt horns against each other, knock into each other for challenge. And that's what they did. And Keefe being a lot heavier than this other guy, basically fell on top of him, did a kind of a leg sweep and fell on top of him and pinned him down. And they were rolling around the ground. And by that time, the protection officer, the CO, that wasn't paying any attention and didn't recognize that there was an unsupervised prisoner in the room. He gets on his radio and calls for help, and all of a sudden you see it's like the Keystone Cops. You see a bunch of cops falling out of a doorway. Come to find out the doorway is like their break room. So they all come out, piling out of the break room, and try to break up the fight, and they eventually get them separated. So that's kind of the extent of the entire event there. But there are so many. The word shady came to mind. I'm baffled by it because there was so much incompetency by whether or not it was policy or just what they called best practice or whatever, that situation should not have happened. And the video actually showed
Right.
very clearly that the guy who was attacking Davis heard them buzz the door to get into the common area. And when he heard that buzzer of them walking a common area, he looked to see who it was, and then he moved backwards to step behind the column because you couldn't see him from where
Mm.
that doorway was. Okay. So it was, I mean, it just anybody. I mean, it was so funny because I'm in the media pool with most of the media guys, cameramen and all that. The still photographer turned around at me and goes, "Oh, he got jumped." I was like, "Yeah, pretty much." But the fact that he was correcting his actions to hide behind this post. And
Yeah.
the defense, the prosecution made a big thing about, well, he had no way of knowing when Keefe D was coming back, and they didn't schedule anything like that. Well, hold on, because everybody knew when Keefe D was going to go meet his attorney, and he was coming back from his attorney's office, and they have to buzz to get the eye in the sky to open up the door. It's an electronic lock system, and they have a central operator who unlocks those doors when they request it. So they buzz the door, and they wait to get the door opened. And apparently, according to the officer that was with Davis, that it took some time to get that door buzzed. So they were standing there buzzing. Well, the guy at the shower knows that's KVD. They're two cells away from each other, probably heard his cell door open and them say, okay, come on, you got your attorney visit. He gets his time out. He's standing out there. The corrections officer for the unit walks away, leaves him there by himself. He hears the buzzer, KVD's coming, and off we go.
Seizes the opportunity.
Well, I mean, if you look at the videotape, I mean, it's about as clear as it could be. Now, the prosecution made a case that Keefe D veered from walking towards the door towards walking towards Hamilton, who was the guy who attacked him, in my opinion.
So is what Kiwi was found guilty of, they both were kind of get pinched for fighting, or are they making, or was this a guilty verdict, meaning Kifi initiated it?
Well, that can be the only takeaway because one of the disqualifiers in a case like this, one of the reasons that you get out from under this battery of a prisoner, and that is if you have reasonable expectation or fear from your life, it's a self-defense argument that you have self-defense. And from the video, it was clear as day that the guy had the jump on him, but because KVD was actually looking at him, he went ahead and basically countered to stop the guy coming at him. And they
Well, that's
rolled
what I'm
him
saying.
down.
How did the court not see the dude like hiding behind the thing and kind of in wait for
Well, they
Kifi
saw
D?
it. The jury saw it. I mean, I saw it.
Well, it's
Everybody saw it.
well, I
And
mean, how could they
you guys are
see
going
it?
to see
And
it too. When I post it up there, you'll
right,
see it too. So people will make up their own minds. But the
interesting.
but because, and this is the point to your answer your question, and it's a good one, that now you've got this other guy who goes to trial in October, and he's being charged with the same thing. But if Keefe D did not act in self-defense, you only have two parties. You got the aggressor and the victim,
Right,
right? Well, they're trying to make this weird argument that both of them are the aggressors. Okay.
right.
And this is like, prisoners gonna fight. That's what they, that's kind of how they put it. And so there's a lot of head scratching going on. But again, here's the thing about Vegas laws, and this is why it's important to talk about this. I would be like, don't do anything wrong with Vegas. The I mean, really, because they'll catch you on something. But the one of the things about it, other than the self-defense, is that the jurors could not consider the incompetence of the Vegas Metro PD and the jail guy that walked out. Because, make the argument very easily, that guy stayed in there, that would have never happened. Because he'd been watching the guy, been on top of him, he didn't know what was going on.
You
But he
said
was
that they
gone.
didn't consider that, or they couldn't
Yeah, they
consider. Oh,
can't. The way the law is written in Nevada law is written,
wow.
they can't consider anything other than self-defense.
I mean, that's almost literally the mitigating circumstance which allowed this to take place is that guy not doing his job.
Well, I mean, that's it. I mean, well, it starts there and it goes forward from there because then you have the other guard. Then they didn't interview the guard that walked away and decided to go take a piss or check cells or whatever he was doing. They didn't interview him. They didn't interview the Sons of Anarchy guard. They interviewed the guard.
Sounds
They
like
I don't know if you ever watch a show. I mean, it's
no,
they had a
I get
hundred
it.
times they had setups like that where the crooked sheriff was like, just like, oh, I'm going to go take a coffee break, and then they beat the crap out of somebody.
Right.
So no, no, I didn't see anything. So when Davis I lost my train of thought. We were talking about oh, they interviewed the second guy, the second guard, and the second guard was the one who had his head buried in the slip, looking down the entire time. He buzzes Davis in. They ask for permission to buzz into this central area, this hub, and they're waiting there. And of course, all the doors are glass. You can see through everything. And the corrections officer, nor D, could see Hamilton because of this post. It's in the way. Can't see him. And all the prisoners know where the cameras are. I mean, that's the thing that somebody told me a long time ago. They're like, everybody knows where the cameras are. All of these prisoners know exactly where to stand to not be in camera range. They got nothing else to
Mm,
do with their day than to figure that out, and they figure it out really quick. And if they don't, somebody tells them, and then they learn it, right? So these guys come through this door. They get buzzed through the door into the central area. The guard with him looking down doesn't even realize there's a fight until they actually literally body contact each other. And it shows this guy was so startled by it that he runs away. He doesn't get in between them. He runs the other way. And then he gets on his radio and he starts radioing for help. Turns around, and then I guess he's using some pepper spray, standing over top of him, spraying him like an aerosol, like he's putting a body freshener on him, and not doing anything to get in anybody's face. He's literally standing away from it, not trying to break it up, not getting in the middle of it, but spraying both of them, which does nothing, obvious. And
mm.
but the one thing, it was the bombshell of the testimony of this officer, and he doubled down on it. He said that whole thing about doing the walk every 30 minutes and everything like that, that wasn't policy. He disagreed with the investigator officer. He did not, he said that the Sons of Anarchy guard, that was not a policy for him to go check those rooms, and that the security and safety of uh, the guy, Hamilton, that should have been a priority for him. He shouldn't have abandoned him like that.
Right.
So and then the first guard, the investigator can't investigate. He even testified crazily. Had testified. He goes, "Are you ever supposed to have two of those prisoners in the same room, ever?" And this guy goes, "Oh yeah, we can do that. In fact, our policy says we can even put them in the same cell together. We can make them cellies." Well, in that environment, as the other guard pointed out, that is not the case. They cannot put two guys together. No two inmates are supposed to be interacting with each other without protective supervision. That's the whole reason that dorm is named that,
Right.
is protective supervision. Got to figure that out. You got a bunch of murderers or alleged murderers running around, and you know they could get into it.
And
So
that's my thought is my default mode is just I'm sus on everything. I'm pretty cynical, but these lapses in protocol, is this normal? Is this just kind of how they roll over there, or was
yeah,
this day?
apparently,
We'll never know if this was intentional or not necessarily, but to me, it's like a huge red flag. You got all these different lapses, one after another,
yeah,
that are out of the ordinary.
yeah,
And then I guess the larger question is this obviously if they wanted to eliminate Keefe, they could, but was this a threat or a warning? Because again, this is around the same time where he started making these other allegations. And again, I know you don't like to go there, but to me, it's just it pretends some of these larger questions of like, all right, why did this happen? These lapses after lapses, and then the timing of it. To me, I'm a little sus.
well, I mean, let's and let's consider what we learned. We learned that Cliff Mogg, who uh, is being paid by the county to listen to phone calls. He was listening to phone calls, and so they were gaining a tactical advantage by eavesdropping on all these phone calls. Now, the sad part about it is that if I'm the defense or Keefe D or RJ Bond or anybody, I can't go get copies of those phone calls, especially a dump of 700 or 1,000 phone calls. I can't get that, but the prosecution can, and they get it. So is that really fair? I mean, they have to they turn
Can
them
Carl get
over.
them? Can
Well,
Arnold get copies of them?
yes, he did.
Okay.
So the so but again, like I said, that um you got this guy Mog who's there, and he's listening to pretty much every word that they say. Now, what I find fascinating about Mog as a witness, and this is going to, I think, play into the TUPAC case as well, is that
Sure.
how non-biased of a witness can you be, or how objective of a witness can you be when you've retired from the police department and your only job is to assist the prosecution in putting a guy in jail? How
That's what.
how
Yeah.
objective can you be?
And if they have such the slam dunk case that they say they have, why do they need this cat?
Well, yeah. So anyway, and he testified that that he originally arrested the guy. They were struggling a lot in the case. They were struggling a lot, and this was stuff that I witnessed, obviously, when the cameras go off and everybody's talking. That they were struggling with the fact that the jury was going to be aware of Keefe D's other trial, the murder trial, big thing. And there were those that were there in the courtroom that heard I guess the judge say, "Oh, you mean Tupac's killer?"
Mm.
Wow. Okay. That for a guy who's innocent until proven guilty, that's
The
kind of a big.
judge said this?
Yes, judge. Yeah, the judge said that. Yep. 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 So, and I wasn't there. So again, allegedly, I wasn't there for that comment. I was told by several people that heard it that it was said, but I
Wow.
wasn't there.
All
But
right.
again, and that kind of gives you the disposition of things. So, and you ask yourself, okay, so all right, so why? Why? Okay. Hang on a second here. Okay, so the why of all of this. Um, it's a jail fight. It's not
It's a
a
what? Oh, jail
it's a
fight.
jail fight. It's a gross misdemeanor of a year. It's a felony of 6 years to a guy who's a convicted felon already. What difference does it make? Why would they do this? If they think they've got him on the murder, they're going to put him
Right.
away for the rest of his life. Why be concerned about a battery in a jail?
Just a
What
little
difference
insurance
does it make? I
policy,
mean,
maybe.
isn't that a valid question?
Well, I mean, like I said, just in case they miss on the murder, they at least got him, what is it, 5, 6 years for this? I mean, he's guilty, but sentencing is when in May.
Yeah, his sentencing is in May. But
Okay.
see, but why bother wasting the taxpayers' time with this
Right.
and money? It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to put a trial together, even if it's for 2 days,
Mm.
because you got to pay the judge, you got to hire the jurors, you got to pay the jurors, the attorneys are charging for their time. There's a whole cost structure built into how many days of trial you're going to be and what it's going to cost.
You got this
It's
guy you're
like,
paying to listen to his phone calls.
yes,
Unless
and the
that's
guy you pay, yes, right. You imagine what that cat's pulling down. He's getting his retirement from LVMPD, and he's still pulling down probably 10 grand a month from, because it's a contract gig. And the
yeah.
prosecutors have an unlimited checkbook. Thank you to the county. They have an unlimited checkbook. So they get this guy and they say he's our most important superstar because he was the lead detective on the Tupac case. And he retires, and then they give him a fat contract. Okay. I'd love to actually do the FOIA on that dude's contract and see what he's getting paid.
Seriously.
But at any rate, you ask yourself the question, why? And as I always tell, for years, the core group of followers that we've had on the Tupac Assassination channel, they're called the Knuckleheads. Shout out to the Knuckleheads. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, we're confused now. We don't know if call them Knuckleheads or Carpet Heads, but right now it's Knuckleheads. And at any rate, I tell them question everything. Question
Yes.
everything.
Yes.
And in this case, you question, you say, why, if you're confident you're going to bag this guy for the rest of his life and put him in jail for murder, why this? Prisoners fight all the time. Why this? Why is a possible 3-year sentence running at the same time concurrently with the 12-month sentence, even if it was maximum on that? Okay.
Right.
Good time and all that. He's out 3 or 4 years. If you're going to bag him for the rest of your life, and you're so confident you're going to bag him for the rest of life, why are you doing this? Because you're just so anal about the justice that no law should ever be broken and we don't prosecute. Okay, really? Okay. Prosecutorial discretion is an amazing tool, and I can't tell you. In fact, Vegas just kicked a murderer case. They just kicked it. They let the woman accused of killing her husband, they just kicked it. Okay. So they clearly don't charge everybody who ever did anything allegedly.
Well,
Okay.
and clearly for this interaction to even take place this fight, they don't dot their I's and cross their T's as much as they, like to claim they do, because this was clearly some dereliction of duties, the fact that this even happened. But I
But I mean,
digress.
so, and I keep being a little evasive about it because I'm waiting to see if you'll come around and you're getting close, but I'll drop it anyway. We'll just do it that way. The why now? And Mark DiGiacomo, who was the prosecutor in that case, and he's the same prosecutor that's prosecuting Keefe D for the Tupac killing. Uh, the minute that the verdict was read, and that's why it was so important for us to get that, at least that clip of the verdict being written out there, is because the minute, without understanding how long he's being sentenced for or anything else, because that happens in May, the first thing that prosecutor says to the judge is, "We want held no bail."
Mm,
Gave the whole thing away. That's what it was all about, was that they'd had a bail hearing. They knew Keefe was trying to get out on bail. They didn't think he was going to skip, but when you're out on bail, you can actually maybe make a better case. Maybe you can work with some people. And
uh,
more importantly, Cliff Mogg could not eavesdrop and monitor his phone calls if he was out. He'd be on an ankle monitor. They know where he was, but he could have all the conversations with anybody that he wanted to have a conversation with.
Well,
So
we
if
haven't spoken about that. You had mentioned that. I don't think it was kind of off air that there was the potential of a bail hearing. I mean, I didn't want to necessarily say anything about it because it was kind of said in confidence, but that totally makes sense now. If that was going to happen, it was a possibility that's now been
Well, he
taken
had already
completely off the
had
table.
one. Well, he had already had one bail hearing. He didn't get it, but because they screwed it up, it was a
A
ham-handed
more
thing.
recent one, I thought there was
Yeah,
supposed
way
to be one.
back
I
whenever
think.
it was a
Okay.
real ham-handed affair. But so, and the judge had bail for him, and there was actually talk again because they were listening to the phone calls. And again, for anybody, but for anybody that gets picked up and you get put in jail, you better realize everything you say is being recorded.
Oh
Everything.
yeah.
And so I am sure that in some phone call somewhere, I haven't heard it, but I'm pretty sure that maybe Keefe D and his son or somebody else was talking about bail. So they knew he was working on trying to get bail. And of course, they can't monitor him and keep him down and try to find more information on their flimsy ass case
Mm,
if
the
he's out
plot
in the wild.
thickens.
If he's out in the
Interesting.
wild. If you keep
Yeah.
him locked down to where every single thing, and the thing about Keefe D, let's be honest, the dude loves to talk. Okay.
Clear, clearly, that's why he's
He loves
here.
to talk and he loves to bullshit, and to the point where I wonder sometimes if he actually understands kind of the difference between reality and fantasy. If that line is kind of blurred for him a little bit. So when he said that, when we were stunned by the verdict because the jury deliberated like an hour. I mean, I don't think it was an hour. I mean, it was that. And
Wow.
again, you have to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. So these juries came back and they said, without a reasonable, beyond a reasonable doubt, Keefe D was the
Mm,
aggressor and he did that. Now, again, the way the laws in Nevada, and this is why I'm bringing it full circle, the way that the laws in Nevada are written is that there doesn't have to be an aggressor and there doesn't have to be a victim. You get the right to self-defense, okay? But where it gets really muddy and really murky on purpose, because this is how Vegas caught mob guys who knew the law and knew how to get around it, and whose kids were Yale attorneys and Harvard attorneys that could skirt around the laws, kind of a David Kenner move, okay, knew the law, knew how to get around it. So they wrote the laws to such that they could say, well, we don't have to have an aggressor, and we don't, and both of them could be aggressors, which is really weird. And but that's how the law's written. So the when he it's clear that the guy was the guy that threw the first punch. It's clear. They said, oh, well, he positioned himself with balled fist. He made a threat to the guy. The guy attacked him. You know what? The guy could have stayed pinned up against the sink. He could have not moved. He could have let him walk by. Nothing would have happened. Period.
And when did you
So,
say his trial's going down?
what's that?
When did you say this guy's trial's going down for the same thing?
October.
Okay. It's interesting
Okay.
that
And
they did Keefe's first because, like you
right.
said, he had a potential pressing bail hearing and they didn't want to wait till October to do his
Well,
second.
that was the interesting thing. They had to do a couple of legal moves because they charged both of them with the same crime and they were going to take them to trial at the same time. But then suddenly the news came down last week that they bifurcated the trial, which means that each guy was going to have their own trial hearing. Because essentially what they're going to do is drag them both up in front of the judge, let them explain their stories, and the judge and jury would figure out who's telling the truth. That was how it was going to go. Then it became we're going to split it in half. And the reason that I believe they split it in half, that they pushed the other guy clear into October and they got KVD on the calendar immediately.
Right.
And I believe that the reason that they put it on the calendar immediately was because they were concerned that he was going to make bail. And because the first thing out of this guy's mouth, even without a hearing, and this is why, again, and I'll play the audio because I have it. When Mark DiGiacomo, who was the prosecutor, the verdict was read, he's guilty. Now, Keefe D is already in jail, Jeff. He is already there with no signs currently that he was going to be able to make bail. You could talk about it, but there was no real evidence. Okay. And so when they think about this guy and they move this trial up months before the other guy's trial, and just put on all the stops to try KVD now. And again, why did he have to ask for no bail on this hearing? Because KVD was already in jail.
Right.
So it wasn't like he was going to just go OR and just walk away, or there was a possibility that he was going back to jail. They knew where he was, and they were
Right.
monitoring his phone calls. But the specter was hanging out there that he could post bail. And the first thing this
Wow.
guy said when right after the verdict was read, didn't matter how long he was going to be in prison for, didn't matter what the sentence was, because I mean, obviously, he's in jail. The sentencing is in May. He's going to get some time. Okay, he was found guilty. He's going to get some time, which means he's not going anywhere.
Right.
He wouldn't be going anywhere until May, and then they're going to read the conviction. And if he gets convicted for 2 years, 6 years, a year, he's going to jail for that time, which will take him into the TUPAC trial, of course, and he'll be there. And they could keep him there anyway for all those reasons. So why do you ask for no bail? Okay. When they gave him bail on a murder, but this is a fighting with an inmate and they get
Right.
no bail.
Mm.
How crazy is that?
It's insane.
Yeah, that's just stupid
I,
because when you break it down like that and you look at the elements of it, you say, wait a minute,
yeah.
you got bail on a murder, but you don't get a bail on a 6-year felony. You don't get bail on that. They locked down the felony because the judge in that case gave him, and this judge was like just rolled over. She's like, oh, bail, yeah, no bail, done. Because again, allegedly, she's the same one that said, "Oh, that's Tupac's killer."
The Tupac killer, like, dude,
Yeah,
that's a total
Tupac.
conflict of interest. I mean, I hope that didn't happen, but I will be surprised. And I know you don't like to do this, but let's just jump out on the branch of speculation. What, if anything, understanding these machinations of just this, what does this portend for the trial next year and him getting a fair trial or a fair shake? What, anything?
Well, as of right now, he's certainly not getting out on bail anytime before
No,
his,
no.
before his Tupac hearing. So he's going to be in jail. And one of the concerns I have is that he loves to talk and he reaches out and he calls people all the time. And nobody wants to leave anybody alone and everybody wants to talk and catch up. But what he doesn't understand is that without that to talk about, there's not a lot to talk about. Like, so for example, Keefe and I, we've talked several times on the phone, many times. I interviewed him, there's we're no strangers. And neither is his son. But in my world, when he calls me, now that especially now that they're using it. See, sometimes you could make a phone call to jail that says, "Oh, it's being recorded," like the Suge Knight stuff. Okay.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't know anybody's recording Suge Knight's calls. I know he's making calls. I don't know if anybody's listening to him or not. Okay, I doubt it. But in this particular case, they are so hot on wanting to get Keefe D that they're listening to everything. So when he
Does he know that
calls,
now? Does he know
what's
about
that?
this guy who does he know about this guy who's like literally tasked to listen to every one of his
Yeah,
words?
well, he was sitting there. I mean, he was the defendant. He was sitting right there in the courtroom when the guy was explaining it. Okay.
Okay. I just say his proclivity to want to talk and run his mouth, you would think he'd stop after being partially pinched because he ran his mouth and wrote a book, but obviously that was
Oh, I was going to
external
say, yeah,
circumstances.
you're talking to the guy who said a bunch of stuff and wrote a book.
Well,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. Some of that he was being leaned on by Kading to do all this stuff, but now that he knows his mouth has got him into trouble, and then now this guy he knows is listening to him, you would think with his proclivity to run his mouth, he'd shut the fuck up.
Well, yeah. Well, some people, kind of get in their own way
True
sometimes.
that. True that.
That's a human condition. Nobody's perfect. And it's kind of a I don't know, it's kind of a sad thing when, he probably has a pretty short list of people trying to call him. Um, there's probably that. In the courtroom, and again, this wasn't the murder trial, but I can
Right.
paint you a picture that in the courtroom itself, other than the nine bailiffs that were in this small courtroom, and it was a small courtroom. I probably sat maybe 75 people in the what they call the galley, which is where you could sit and watch the trial. Maybe 75 people, 75 chairs, and then they had the jury and the judge and the whole thing, the bar. And but because it wasn't a big courtroom, it was one of their smaller courtrooms, and there was um, not during jury selection, but the day of the actual trial. I think there was probably 10 different media outlets, journalists or whatever, that were there covering it. But in terms of anybody there for the trial for him, his son.
Hmm.
That's it. That's it. Okay.
What do they say?
And
Victory has 1,000 fathers. Defeat is an orphan, man.
well, and and I think that's the kind of the part that made me sad because there's all these people running around saying he's not guilty and they're all free TPD and do that, not granted everybody doesn't live in Vegas. I get all that. But even like his son was the only one there. No family, no friends, no nothing. Okay.
Wow.
No one to encourage this guy. So that gave me kind of a window into the trial to think that, I think to some people this might be the trial of the century, but to some others, maybe not. Maybe you might find that that courtroom is largely empty because most people have already made up their minds about something like that,
Yeah.
alleged comment about Tupac's killer, or that they just don't like him because he's shot his mouth off and he was so arrogant about things and made comments about people and you know that he's not a he's not a likable guy. And he's not. I mean, to be matter
Right.
of fact with you, he's not. You
His,
kind of
his
have
his
to,
chickens have come home to roost of sorts, whether he's guilty of this or not. Like his
yes.
kind of reputation is now coming back to bite him a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's burned all his bridges. That's what it looked like to me. It's like one of those guys, see guys are going around begging for money. There's only so much money that you're going to be able to beg for, and at that point, there you have no other options. You can't keep asking people for money. It just at one point the well's going to go dry, and I do feel strongly like that's what happened with Keefe D. That his family was very upset by the verdict. I can tell you that. His son was really upset by it because again, there's a lot of things of what it means possibly for the Tupac trial. Because now, his conviction has set up that he's a violent guy.
Yep.
Okay. And they got that
And you
on
know those
lockdown.
prosecutors will drill that down in the POC trial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they were listening to Cliff Mogg was listening to my phone calls with KVD. So, I'm kind of like one step removed from this whole thing. But, pretty
So
soon
he
he's
was
probably
already
gonna call me up.
facing an uphill battle, and this recent conviction just increases
Yeah,
the,
it does.
yeah.
Now, and so people go, well, it's over. It's over. It's done. And my comment to his family is that you got to kind of do it the Trump way. And I hate to, because Trump's is such a lightning rod. But here's the thing: he had all these cases stacked against him, all these charges filed, and all these different courts, and all these criminal charges and everything like that. And instead of fighting all of them, he just went for the bigger prize, and he got the bigger prize, and everything else just kind of got blown away from it. He solved all those other problems by fixing one, and all that stuff went away. So, that's what I said. If KVD is capable of going to trial for the murder of Tupac Shakur, presenting the right evidence and convincing the jury that he's not guilty. If he's not guilty for that, then he shouldn't have been in prison in the first place. He shouldn't have been arrested. And that none of that thing, including the beating that he's being charged with, none of that would have happened. So I think if he beats the bigger rap, then there may be some jaundice looking at this fight for
Yeah.
being a little bit more than what it was cooked up to be.
And I wonder if the lay person will ever get the powers that were arrayed kind of against him, the Greg Kadings, et cetera. Like you were talking about, people have their mind made up. Yeah, man, it's been 30 years. The unsolved, the murder raps, these huge studios that have gotten behind this false narrative. So it's almost easier to believe, this whatever, this jerk did it, who's guilty of all this other nefarious stuff because we've seen from these TV shows XYZ. I have to ask you, what, if anything, obviously Keefe entered Reggie's name into the proceedings, if you will, not too long ago. What, if anything, or how much oxygen, if any, has been given to that? I know the trial's been postponed for a year, but has there been anything that's come of these kind of recent revelations from Keefe's part as far as the allegations on about
Yeah,
Reggie?
I don't know. I don't know. I haven't checked the dates. You bring up a good point. I haven't checked the dates, and I'm sure a knucklehead will figure it out, of the date when KVD filed his motion to dismiss and the date when the attack happened. Okay. To
Hmm.
see if there is a correlation timing wise about it
I
at all.
do know it was before. I don't know exactly how far, but I remember we brought it up, whether it was on this show or we hadn't probably started the show, but through our conversations, that because I was just literally like, man, is this? And I'm worried about his safety inside because he's starting to talk about other people who might be involved, and it could be no correlation whatsoever to this fight he had. But I just remember the timing I thought was a little suspicious.
Well, again, like I said, Sons of Anarchy.
You like that one?
They
That's
had
how it
that.
plays out. No, you're right. No, that's how it plays out.
Yeah, and they did it a million times in that show. That's how I know it, 'cause it was like almost a weekly thing.
Right.
But when I'm thinking about your question. And sorry for the mental stall here for a
No,
minute.
that's all right.
But I think if there is Keefe safe in jail. Well, the interesting thing about that is you look at Suge Knight and people ask why Suge Knight said he saw the shooter but won't say who it is, and he may say who it's not, but he won't say who it is, and he says he saw the guy, and if you saw one, you saw both, and
Yeah.
all these things. Yeah, but he's all indirect about it. Doesn't come out and say anything. So if you consider Clifford Mogg listening to every phone call, eavesdropping, and then the repercussions in the jail from this charge or another charge, then
Yeah.
you suddenly have this thought that, well, maybe that's the reason Suge Knight's not saying anything. Because if Suge Knight said that Kevin Gaines did it, Kevin Gaines LAPD, you've got
Yeah.
LA County Correction Officer there. He's in a state pen, but those guys can get in there. The cops can get in there, and and they're all kind of one big happy family with the correction
Yeah.
officers and the cops and all that. They kind of all get along. So if it comes out that Suge says it was XYZ, and that happens to have a badge or a uniform attached to it,
Yeah.
then
That
that
makes
could make
sense
life very difficult for Suge Knight in prison,
for
as
sure.
I'm assuming it will probably be for Keefe D. Now, Suge Knight is in the general population. He's actually more in danger than Keefe D, because Keefe D is locked up for 23 hours a day.
Right.
Suge Knight is not.
And not only would Keefe be implicating, Reggie, but everything the Las Vegas Police Department got on this case was from Reggie, and
Yep.
Reggie was one of their lead witnesses in the prosecution for the indictment. So yeah, I'm pretty sure they want to keep on a lid on whatever Keefe is saying as far as allegations relating to Reggie. But I think that's a good point you bring up. That's why Suge has to keep his mouth shut because he's in a California prison. His life's in danger.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think same
I
same with
believe that
Reggie.
for some time. Yeah, I believe that
Yeah.
for some time. That he can't. I mean, I'm not saying he wanted to or he would, but I would say that you'd be the smarter person to keep that close,
Yeah.
because it doesn't inflame anything. Keefe D has not made any claims about the correction officers or the cops and stuff like that. So
Right.
the only thing that he might get is somebody that's a quote unquote Tupac fan, charging him or trying to beat him up. Now he's made claims that the correction officers have beat him up. Don't know if it's true. Again, like I said, credibility wise, Keefe D's a tough one. And that's why I got to give it, I was hard on Carl Arnold, his attorney, and I was very hard on him. And but I watched him work yesterday in the trial, and not only did he hit all the marks, I thought for sure QPD was getting out. I thought for sure that this was not jury was going to come back, and because they debated, like I said, in an hour. And I thought short jury pool, yeah, they're no not guilty. They're coming back real fast. But they wanted to get out of there, got a verdict of guilty, and not a single one of them stood around afterwards to be interviewed about why they convicted him. Nobody.
Mm,
Okay, they got the frick out of there,
mm,
and which is
interesting.
suspicious all by itself. But when, um, but again, is Keefe in danger in jail? Like I said, other than a Tupac fan, no, I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
but again, because he didn't really make any direct claims against Nevada, any corrections officers.
True. I'm just saying the more he does speak and the more oxygen is given to the Reggie stuff, puts the way Las Vegas has moved for the last almost 30 years kind of in question because they didn't really do their due diligence. They just went with what Reggie gave them, and just ran with it. So it kind of, puts a little spotlight on their shoddy police work for, 2, 3 decades. Just
Well,
anyway.
that's why it's so important to watch Tupac Cover Up, and it's so important to watch episode 5, Tupac Cover Up. And 5 and 6 are great episodes, but the 5 talks about the circumstances surrounding when they made the decision to prosecute Keith Davis and what other elements may have been involved in that decision,
Right.
at the time, and how it actually makes a lot of sense. So you kind of
It
have to
totally does. The young man that was pressing them with the FOIA information. Yeah, definitely 5 and 6 is definitely one to check out because that was a revelation to me. I'm like, why now? Why all of a sudden did they come up with this arrest of Keefe? And like you had said in that episode, those episodes, they were being pressed by the gentleman who they had told him, oh, it was an active case. We couldn't talk about it, but it wasn't active.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're going to tell them, hey, you got, when you lose at the Supreme Court, now they have to turn over major portions of the Tupac Shakur case investigations, which reveal in and of themselves they weren't doing shit in the
No.
job. But more importantly, in addition to releasing that, they just didn't want the information out there. And it shows that, they are claiming there's an active investigation and there's not. So that actually goes on the record. The judge says, no, you don't have an active investigation, so you need to get this stuff up. And they wanted to combat that very badly.
Like I
Um,
said, and it doesn't make them look good as far as their police work and due diligence in this case. So,
it's not. Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, so that's
Interesting development to say the least. And again, thank you, RJ, for you being there. And I say all the time, you're one of the last of the Mohicans who have this kind of level of insight, boots on the ground in this case, man. And it makes kind of your investigation and your insight to this, the information you bring to it, that much more authentic because you're there.
yeah. Well, I felt at the time. I mean, it wasn't even a. Um, you get a couple of wins commercially. You get a win because you got the footage and it's good B-roll and all that, and I don't have to pay anybody for it because I got the same footage they do. And so you can look at a mercenary like I was there for doing that. But really, the reality was is I felt very strongly, and now we know why. But I felt very strongly that this case was a lot more substantial in terms of its value than a one-off. He was in a fight and in jail.
Right.
That this had some connective tissue to the TUPAC case,
Sure.
um, and how they managed that case.
Well, and
And
you reiterating the fact and bringing it, reiterating again and bringing it public that he was kind of in talks for a potential move on bail makes this that much more makes it make that much more sense that they, like you said, right after he was found guilty, no bail. Like, wow, why are you so
right, yeah,
adamant on him not
exactly.
having bail?
Yeah, for a locked guy who's already locked up, and on a minor felony, which 6 years is nothing for a felony. Felony is 20-25 years. But on a minor felony, a lesser felony, shorter term, with a guy who's already locked up, and on a murder case is allowed bail, and then turn around and for a 6-year sentence, he's allowed no bail. So, I mean, the writing kind of put itself on the wall, and unfortunately, you go through 2 days of trial and all these ups and downs and hearing all this stuff, which is all interesting. But then at the end of the day, when they find him guilty of something, and it's clear to everybody in the room that he was jumped, but
Right.
again, to close the circle, you have to worry about the venue that you commit your crime in. And not
Facts.
everybody knows, but there are certainly states that are much more prosecute happy than others. You have to know the elements of what they're trying to charge you with, so you don't do those things, and then you try to correct your behavior without getting caught. But the problem is in Nevada, like I talked about that conspiracy law, there are laws that are written a certain way, and these prosecutors, they know how to make them work,
Yeah.
so they can get a conviction without challenging the guard that was walking and that wasn't paying any attention, challenging the guy that walked out of the room, the Sons of Anarchy guard. You know, that guy was, in my opinion, derelict, completely derelict of duty. Okay.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
And whatever happens there, if I had been Davis, I'd probably sued the Vegas PD and who would also run the correction center and the county, because they obviously their policies are bad. If you're leaving a protective supervision alleged murderer in a room by himself where other prisoners can come or go, unprotected and unsupervised, there's a problem with your policy.
Without a doubt.
There's a
And through
problem
that
with your,
dereliction, I get jumped, then I get
yep,
charged and then convicted for some
yeah,
bullshit. We got a
exactly.
problem. We definitely have a
And
problem.
it's the same group of people. The
Right.
same group of people that wrote the policy are the ones charging him. Okay. So again, you know, lots of card tables in Vegas.
Yes. Yeah. Without a
Which
doubt.
means lots of decks. And perhaps some of those decks are stacked.
Well, again, man, I appreciate the insight. I was really, really excited. I heard the news yesterday. I didn't realize you were there, so I was really anxious to hear this episode and get kind of the inside baseball because I didn't even think about because I remember we had talked about the bail, but I didn't even realize this had a huge implication on his potential bail. And like I
Yeah.
said, I wonder how
Well,
much
nobody
what this
thought it did until he mentioned no bail.
no
Then
bail. Yeah,
suddenly everybody
yeah,
was like, whoa, that was kind of the shocker. It was like watching a movie and having that twist ending.
yeah.
The movie's already got a down ending, and all of a sudden they throw a wrench in it and say, by the way, and he just made it like an off comment. Okay, yeah, well, on this thing is, I'm assuming it's no bail. And she's like, yeah, no bail. And that's it. Once he got kicked for that for no bail, he ain't getting bail on the other one because he's pending the charges on this one.
Right. Yeah.
So
That's
that's it.
a big tell, a big
Big,
tell. And again,
big
I wonder
seal
what
it
this
up.
portends for the future trial. But again, RJ and I are going to be here every week as this thing develops and getting the inside baseball and this whole crazy odyssey that has been this trial.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but for this week and to all the knuckleheads, I say again, question everything. I will try to get. I need to get home where I have a little bit more powerful editing gear, to start getting clips of the trial up, so that everybody can see the actual testimony. And I'm not going to cut it up. Sometimes it'll be 10, 15 minutes. I mean, the video itself's only 2 minutes, and the actual testimony is probably like 10 minutes a clip. So y'all can hear everything. There's only three witnesses. And and then you can hear the closing arguments, and you have besides, it's a very interesting education on how our criminal system works. Yeah, I think you'll be fascinated by it.
Yeah, I'll
Uh,
be interested to check it out, man. I mean,
yeah.
still knowing the result and what happened, I still want to see kind of how it played
Yeah.
out.
And how good of a job Carl Arnold did. I mean, he did the best he could with the hand that was dealt him. That's my opinion.
Well, cool, brother. I know you are in Vegas right now. Safe travels
Mhm.
to you back to
Thanks.
La La Land, and
Yeah.
we'll hook
We'll get
back up
back
next
on
week.
it. But in the meantime, question everything. Jeff's good hearing from you again, and we
Yes, sir,
are
brother.
we are out.
See ya.